Hello again, folks. Great to have Bob Ferrari back. Bob's been a frequent um, guest on our video series. I thought I'd bring him back because it's been a crazy year for supply chains. Bob, I'm surprised you have any hair left at all after what we've been through.
Yeah, what little I have is just getting thinner and thinner and thinner. Let me tell you, what a year.
Well, we did one last December, and that was pretty tough. And you came out and you said, you've been really proud of how supply chain managers have managed through all the chaos of last year. My God, what have they done this year? How can you have a repeat? This has been even worse.
Yeah, this clearly has been probably the most challenging year ever across global supply chains. There's no question about it. And, we all see the headlines and, those of us that are in.
Tell me what headlines you're seeing. I'm seeing, obviously, the California port issues. I'm seeing labor issues, trucker labor issues. Clearly, we're starting to see inflation, up and down the chain. We were talking about retailers, how they're not needing to discount much. There aren't too many promotions in retail. So all this is, in some ways, somebody's clearly doing well, but it must be chaotic to navigate through.
Yeah, and I think, to be some of the, the brute reality is supply chains are broken. Industry supply chains are broken right now, and it's going to take several more months to get this corrected. I mean, that's the reality. And, those headlines are starting to come out now. I mean, they were subtle, at maybe the early part of the year. They're not subtle anymore. And, you have executives now that are, readily fessing up to the fact that, yeah, we got some challenges and we're going to address them, but it's going to take time. There's a lot of stuff to fix.
Well, I didn't expect you to say broken, but give me an example of that's a fairly extreme term. Give me an example of what you're talking about.
Example would be, well, clearly the most visible one is semiconductor. Semiconductor, that goes into all these other industries, automotive, high tech, smartphones, and all that stuff. I mean, what other term can you use in that, broken has different meanings to different stakeholders here. You can have a conversation about the automotive industry that in 2020, when they saw, global demand for autos just evaporate, they panicked. And when they panicked, they said, well, we're going to cancel all of our major supply orders. And they threw semiconductor into the ring of that. Then when the market came back in the latter stages of 2020, then they wanted to turn the burners back on. And then all of a sudden, wait a minute, what happened here? And that was a discovery of what happened. The principal semiconductor manufacturers, well, they started to prioritize the high margin stuff, the microprocessor types of things, because guess what? We were all buying new PCs, new servers, networks and everything because everybody was working from home. Huge demand there. So that's where the market went. And automotive got left behind. So that was one part of it. And then even in the high tech and consumer electronics area, then it became the notions of who had the most influence, right? So Apple, sure, it's going to get influence. It represents quite a bit of volume to TSMC and to others, contract manufacturers, Foxconn, and things like that. So they get the allocation. Other high-tech companies, consumer electronic, medical electronics, which you think would have a priority because of the pandemic, well, they got hit as well. So that to me those are broken supply chains with single causation, but it's there. That's one example right there.
So let's stay on that for a minute. I hear from others that also said lean is dead. They said, we try to optimize a little too tight, right?
Yeah.
And to your point, if they were lower value, it just seems like the criticality of component was not well defined, right? Suddenly now simple, even cheap chips are not available.
Yes,
So are you seeing a little bit of rethinking around lean and, how much buffer stocks and all that?
absolutely, unequivocally. You hear now a lot of a lot of statements being made that we're going from just in time to just in case. That seems to be the terminology that everybody's wrapping around. And it has that meaning. It's basically, we have supply chain leaders now saying, we now have to account for resiliency of the supply chain. It's no longer about chasing lowest cost. There's pretty much frank admission now. I'm hearing much more at the senior level about that. Okay, we pushed it too far. And now we've got to now factor in these notions of resiliency, where we need added agility. A new term that really comes up now is control. We've got to regain control. And it means the same thing. It means that if we have today a very far-flung global supply chain where material is moving constantly from country to country to country, we lost control. And now we need to regain that control. So there's some clear messaging on this right now.
What are you hearing? One of the analysts in that space said it could get worse after the Olympics. I mean, they were talking about China maybe embargoing Taiwan and so on. Are you starting to hear?
Yeah,
That would be dire, right? I mean, that would be clearly broken beyond broken.
Some of the discussions. So how bad can it really get? Can it get any worse? But you're right. There is building risk everywhere. There is. Just look at what's happening with China now with their electrical power interruptions right now. That's the lead up to the Olympics. And you're right. What could happen? Some people don't want to think about that, but they have to. It's a reality of their business. And I think that just stands to reason. It's going to take a few more months to sort all this out.
Well, before that, we have our own problem to solve, right? Do you see anything? You see anything to end the California disaster?
Not right now. I mean, even as we speak here, on November 16th, there's 80 ships still stacked up on the West Coast ports. And holiday fulfillment has already started. The sales are running right now, as you know. That inventory is not going to make it. No question about it. And regardless of what you do, the system, the whole logistics was already fractured. And we could spend a whole webcast on that. But basically, in my mind, what it boils down to is we uncovered the fact that there's a lack of overall synchronization of material movements in global commerce. So, containers get to the port. The port runs on 1970 and 1980s technology, which basically says, hey, there's only one way we do it. You come in, we check you in, and we figure out what container and everything. And we don't know what's going to hit us the next hour or two with truck volume. We just deal with it, right? And that just cascades all the way down the system. Containers get stopped. You don't have enough chassis. They're not aligned. They're not synchronized. The railroad gets screwed up. Can't move the stuff. The inbound, the Chicago yard has to be shut down because we have too many containers. Nobody's picking them up. Don't have enough drivers to do it.
Some of the snafus have just been mind-boggling. And you go, how did we not see this coming? I mean, containers piled one on top of another. Some towns saying you cannot have more than two because of wind conditions. And you go, my God. I mean, these are things you probably were familiar with them, but now that you see them, you go, how did we get there?
Yeah, and it's because before everything sort of ran as it should. It wasn't smooth. It had a little bit of this dysfunction, but yet it was predictable. So we all took it for granted. Okay, well, yeah, there's hiccups, but eventually they're going to get there and they're going to meet their commitment to when they are. All of that changed now. When global shipping just about broke down at this point. And now It's that analogy when you drain the swamp, guess where all the rocks are? You see them very clearly. And these are all the rocks. And, they're going to have to get fixed.
Well, maybe I'll regret saying this, but it's not all bad, right? I mean,
No,
we've seen last mile delivery just continue to chug along. We've seen warehouses move closer to demand, micro fulfillment. I mean, these are trends that happened like took off in the last year, and supply chains have reacted to them, right?
yes,
I mean, it's so much more pleasant to order online, and the darn thing is ready for you to pick up. Last year,
Yep.
it wasn't true. And
That's
2
true.
years ago, how few stores even offered that, right? So that's
Yeah, I
all
mean,
positive. But I guess if there is no merchandise, they can't work miracles, right? So that's
no,
not good.
no. I mean, on the one
But
hand,
let's not get negative. Tell me what has, from your perspective, what do you feel good about?
the good about it, I think, is that we're seeing some definitive data right now that indicates that companies that started to invest in supply chain digital transformation and elements of technology, process improvement before the pandemic actually hit, were better able to deal with it, to respond back, to take advantage of the opportunities, the new product opportunities that were presented because of the pandemic. It's clear evidence of that right now, and it's building every single day. That's a positive because it says, okay, it's making it clearer for a lot of other supply chain organizations and their businesses that, okay, we know where we need to go now. And we know where we need to put our prioritization. So that's been a positive. I think another one there's a very renewed appreciation on the value of people. And we talked about it last year in December last year, because so many supply chain operational workers were deemed essential, during the pandemic, and they had to go to work. They couldn't sit at home, and they had to encounter a lot of difficult conditions, and they feared for their personal health and all those things, but they came through. They did their jobs, and I think there's a new appreciation of that effort. And now what we see now is another fundamental challenge is occurring now with this great resignation. And now people are quitting in droves, unfortunately. And it's impacting supply chains. And that's part of the headlines right now. But the positive, if you want to put a positive on this, and I think there is that new recognition is starting to play through. The fact that, what did we see coming up to this holiday season when Amazon, Walmart, Target, and all started wanting to recruit the 100,000 each of new seasonal workers? They started to put in the bonus structures. They started to add tuition assistance. They started to talk about, okay, what other things do you need? How, can we help you with family leave? Can we help you with all these other things? Amazon fessed up. Hey, we screwed up in some of our HR policies. When did that ever happen again? That's a positive in my mind, because it says, hey, now they're willing to open the kimono a little bit and say, okay, we've got issues as well.
To me, what the really, really positive things is we've talked about it. We're starting to see some action, right? Let me give you 3 examples. So manufacturing is starting to come back.
Yeah.
I mean, the big issue would be, oh my God, we don't have to invest so much capex, right? Or we don't have enough labor. I mean, there were every excuse in the world why we can't do it. Let's say, yeah, we should, but we can't.
Right.
I think those arguments are disappearing. I'm seeing a lot more capex being opened up for bringing stuff back. And labor, people are working around. There's automation, so much automation that the labor is, not as demanding as it was in the previous generation. So that's one positive. The other positive is, I was kind of surprised with the Panama Canal opening that people did not. I mean, California has been a choke point for a long time. 40% of our imports come through there. I was surprised people did not plan for another West Coast port, or even Gulf and Florida ports and all that. Starting to hear people say we cannot be dependent on California that much anymore. Now, again, they said that 10 years ago when Panama Canal was opening up, but hopefully this time we will follow through on that, right? Nothing better than to reduce that from 40 to 25 if you can. And the third thing I'm seeing is, people would talk about e-commerce, but then they would say, yeah, I'll let somebody else do it for me, Shopify or Amazon or whatever. I'm seeing a lot more attention to direct to consumer. Consumer brands are saying, why am I giving up control, to your point, control to the big channel masters in this case, right? Why don't I start thinking about subscription models and maybe delivering them directly to consumers, right? So those three trends to me, we've talked and talked, starting to finally seem to have some legs. What do you see?
I see the same thing, Vinnie. I would concur with those. I think they're all at play right now. I think another part of that is there are, in my mind, there's stakeholder conflicts here that need to get resolved. Just take the Panama Canal issue that you brought up. Well, part of that, I think it was what 2000. Hold on, let me. I think it was 2016, 2017. If you remember when the West Coast dock strike occurred, that was a sign right there, because when that occurred, we had the same headlines. There were hundreds of ships off the coast because they couldn't get processed. So that was a signal even back then that there was an issue here. And the issue sometimes has a intertwining of stakeholder conflict, because you got labor unions, and they certainly have some needs here. You have shipping companies themselves that they don't want to go through the canal because that ties up the ship, another 10 days to make that transit. Whereas, if they can dump the cargo in the West Coast, well, you can turn it around, get back to Asia and pick up another load. So there's some conflicts there that are going to have to be resolved here. But I think,
and not to mention, bringing it to Houston or Tampa or Miami, then you got to plan for containers.
Yeah, exactly.
Inventory of containers then has
the whole system has to adjust. Right? Yeah, but again, the positive here that there was more traffic through the Panama Canal, and like the Port of Savannah is growing by leaps and bounds now, literally. New York, New Jersey, more volume. Gulf Coast, same thing. Houston, as you mentioned. So it's starting. It's not, to the levels that probably need to be, but it's there. And I think a lot of this will change over the next few months.
Well, I live in Florida. Our governor has certainly been saying, we're open, come on by. But like you say, it takes another 10 days and it just throws off everything else.
Yeah. Time is money in supply chain. That's the problem.
Yeah. Let's talk about climate change and renewables. Now that Glasgow has finished, I'm hearing that almost too much in some areas, right? And then in the supply chain area, though, it hasn't had much impact, right? If you look at renewables, they haven't affected aviation much. They really haven't affected shipping much. Packaging, I guess, it has an impact on some packaging, but what are you seeing in terms of the whole renewables, green policy discussion applying for supply chains?
I think the whole topic and the whole strategy related to sustainability is getting much more attention right now, far more attention than it did a year ago, clearly. Every senior executive that I hear speak about it, you hear a real awareness now that we've got to accelerate the game on sustainability. And it's not just sustainability, but it's the whole notion of CSR, the whole aspect of the ethical part of this, the responsibilities, social responsibilities, that's a healthy conversation that's long overdue, at least in my mind. And it's there now. I think it's there. I think as we speak now with COP26 just concluding, I think there's going to be a new sense of urgency around this for supply chains. I don't know if you saw it, but there's some new data out from HSBC and the Boston Consulting Group that talks about the fact that over the next 30 years, just in supply chains, it's going to take $100 trillion worth of investment over 30 years, which is a staggering number in itself. But yeah, it's 30 years, but it's still staggering. But it begs the question of, do we have 30 years? I think a lot of executives are starting to grapple with that. And a lot of C-suite executives as well to say, hey, we may not have 30 years. We may have to get things done in a decade.
I saw COP26 a little differently, and I had a guest a couple of weeks ago. We talked about this. I think the world has become very hypocritical. I mean, there is the West that is obviously looking at wind and solar in particular, and a lot of reuse. The good news is it's a lot of reuse and refurbish. Reducing waste is getting attention. That's healthy. For renewables, I don't know, man. I mean, whatever we do is being completely nullified by China, India, Russia, Indonesia, Brazil. I mean, they just aren't moving. India said they'll be carbon zero in 2070. You're talking about 30 years, that's 50 years. China said 2060, right? So that, strong word, but that hypocrisy makes you wonder, is climate change real? I mean, if we're going to accept that from them, why are we burdening ourselves to move much quicker? So I don't know. I don't know if
I think that's a part of it, Vinnie. I think another part of it is the reality. The reality of each passing year. What are we seeing? And the effects of global warming and the severity of storms. Especially now. I mean, it's very clear. It's very evident. It's costing businesses a lot of money to have to deal with all of this. And all of that came through in the COP26 debate. I mean, it is a reality. It's a political reality. But, there is certain, let's just take some of the industries right now in supply chain, all right? The global shipping industry overall has been dragging its feet about sustainability and getting weaned off fossil fuels, bunker fuel. I mean, they talk about the most polluting.
But this is where I come down hard on renewables. They can only do certain things. I mean, if you look at the total economy, they can clearly utilities can move there. It's starting to move to more solar and wind. We can do home. Some EVs can use them. But aviation, shipping, I mean, we can't even run a single engine plane on a battery, right? We're going to run commercial aviation.
I agree.
Shipping, ocean tankers. I mean, I've seen one small ship run about 10% on wind, right? So they just haven't scaled enough for many of the modes that you're talking about.
No question about it, Vinnie. But, there's another part, I often call it, the reality check. And the reality check is the industry, the maritime industry, is on par now to make $100 billion in profits this year, more than they made in the previous 25 years combined. Now you're sitting there very rich with profits, and yet what are you doing for sustainability efforts? And I think, you could shake your head, but
but my point is, even if they said yes, they can't buy it. The capability isn't there, right? I mean, unless you can show me a plane that flies on batteries or hydrogen fuel cells, what are they going to invest in?
Well, they're talking about, I've seen some reports where the new ship orders that they're putting in right now, they're looking to do these kinds of things. They're looking for natural gas alternatives and fueling vessels. They're looking for advanced turbine technologies. They're looking
all
for,
that is pragmatic, right? That's getting away from the noise from COP26, which is no fossil fuels, no nuclear, it's got to be wind and solar, right?
yeah,
I don't like that extreme view they have in that. I'd love to have more nuclear. I'd love to have more geothermal, right? And so on. So,
well, we got to get through all of that.
yeah.
Definitely got to get through all that. It's not easy. It's not going to be easy. You know, Airbus is just starting to think about, you know, hydrogen powered aircraft. It's going to take them what? I don't know, a decade to come up with it, but at least they're doing it.
Testing, all the, you know, testing and all that. I mean,
Yeah.
that's a very rigorous industry. You can't just unleash a
No,
new
I know.
statement on the industry, right? Right.
Yeah.
Let's talk about the software industry.
Yep.
Since that's a lot of friends in the industry, right? You know, so I hear a number of them are starting to say, you need new supply chain management. And I'm tempted to ask them, where were you for the last year? show me where your software helped people through this chaos. What are you seeing?
Well, yeah, there's, you know, to fess up among friends, there's a lot of technology companies that suddenly have become supply chain experts. There's no question about it. The joke I often made is, I thought I was a supply chain industry analyst before. Now I find out I got 1,000 more peers out there that I never even knew existed anymore. So everybody's become an expert in supply chain management. But humor aside, I think they all want to make a contribution to this. I think they have something to offer. But what I see lacking, Vinnie, is they continue to focus on the marketing messaging, but they don't focus on defining the problem and helping companies to sort out what the problem is for them and where technology can help them with that. I think the industry is falling short in that area. There's a lot of marketing hype going on. It's like Y2K, if you remember that. We're old enough to remember that, you know. All these things, you know, oh, you know, we've got the software to solve all this. Well, it never came first, but you never had the software either. And now, you know, I often hear, oh, you know, we're going to increase supply chain visibility and all these other things. Yeah, fine. But what's the problem? It's beyond visibility right now. Like I mentioned before, it's synchronization of processes. What can your technology do to help that? In automation, you know, everybody's, you know, only on the automation side, they all focus on all the great things the automation can do. But the other part of that equation is, how are you going to get people to relate to the automation? So it's complementary. And we talked about this last December. There are some robotics companies in, you know, the collaborative robotics area that got this right up front. And they're doing really good in this right now. I hear, you know, I've tuned into a couple of customer conferences like Six Rivers and others, Locus and other companies as well. And you now hear companies talking about workers that have begun to embrace the robotics. They're giving them names. You know, they all have, you know, there's a theme, a Star Wars theme or a sports team thing. You know, I want to deal with the Giants robot today or the Patriots robot today. So they're beginning to understand.
The co-CEO of Six Rivers, I interviewed him last year. And he said, you know, we've got it's heartening that workers are starting to embrace this, right? So he gave the example of somebody at one of his customers where he said, she actually goes home and tells her child, I get to work with R2D2 or whatever the robot's name was, with some level of pride, right? Which is good to see. Yeah.
Exactly. And it's real. I mean, you know, this is not the technology provider doing the presentation. This is the company. This is the, you know, the warehouse manager or, you know, the operations manager. Basically, the cynics that were there before, you know, saying, you know, wait a minute, there's something to this. The two can work together, the technology and the human. And the basis is the human understands that this is making my job better. I don't have to walk as long. I don't go home now dead tired at the end of every day. The other part is, it gives them a pride, as you pointed out, that, hey, I can do this. I can deal with this kind of technology. And that gives them the confidence to move on to other things in that same area.
Well, you're starting to hear, Amazon's metrics are a little too demanding. I mean, it's a typical push and pull. There'll always be people who will bitch and moan about automation, but, the good news is, like you say, the key word is collaboration, not just.
Exactly.
Right. Yeah.
And,
Well,
and
it's
now,
exciting.
I was going to say, just in the analytics area, a lot of good work being done here. And I think the technology companies are finally understanding that in order to have, the functional, the line of business worker do their own analytics, you just can't leave the technology as a black box. You got to do all the pre-integration. You got to make sure that it's conversational. You got to make sure it's easy to use. It's understandable. I covered the early days of supply chain planning and optimization. And, the unwritten humor back then was it's still a black box, and they were selling it. The technology companies were selling it as a black box. And the only people who could deal with it were data scientists who, basically became very, very essential for a lot of these companies. But, other than that, there was no generally adoption until the companies came back and said, wait a minute, we've got to package this. So we got to package it in applications and take that grudge out of it. And we're seeing the same thing now in analytics. It's going to come.
So Bob, how can we make sure Santa doesn't deliver lumps of coal this December, or is it a little too late for that?
It may be a little too late for that.
Bob, give me something positive, man. Give me some what excites you?
Well, come on. There's a lot to be excited here. The big retailers are going to deliver. Okay, the Amazons, the WalMarts, the Targets, they got the inventory. The Best Buys, it's all there. They had the influence. They had the money to charter their own container ships. There's the good news and bad news there. But anyway, that's the good news about the holiday. They'll have the inventory. It may not be the model you want. It may not be the hottest toy or the hottest electronics. It may not be all of the iPhone 13s that you were betting on, but they'll get there eventually.
And importantly, from a CFO's perspective, there are very few promotions, right?
Exactly. Very few promotions, yes. So the balance sheets may look a little better. Well,
Bob, we'll need to bring you back in 6 months and see if there's more chaos next year, or we managed to wrangle some of the thorny issues we're looking at now.
Yeah, I think a lot of things are going to start to really happen next year.
After the Olympics, we can come back and talk about the chips.
Sure, absolutely. That'd be a good conversation. So there's a bunch of conversations we can have.
Bob, Merry Christmas.
Have
a great holiday. Well, Thanksgiving first.
And happy holiday to all our listeners.
Thank you.